Welcome back to the show. We're talking about a change of leadership this week for South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress. Joining us now from Cape Town is Ebrahim Rasool. He's a former South African ambassador to the United States. Ambassador, thanks for joining us. Let me start with the events of the past week. An important week for South Africa. The ANC has a new president, and the man, Cyril Ramaphosa, could become the next president of South Africa. How important is this for the country?
I think that this is crucially important for our country. I think that we have endured a year, if not a decade, of decline. I think that we have seen our economy, not just as a result of the global recession, but as a result of our own politics, our own corruption issues and state capture and all of those. Confidence get drained out of our economy. We're growing at just around under 1%. We've had terrible exchange rates. Exports have fallen. Confidence by the people have dropped. The ANC has lost crucial metros in last year's elections. So this has been a terrible period for South Africa. And suddenly, on the announcement of Cyril Ramaphosa's assumption of the leadership of the African National Congress, the mood is lifting. There is euphoria in society, although there are misgivings by ANC members about just how much leeway Cyril Ramaphosa will have to put his stamp on South Africa and to renew the ANC and lead our country back to the preeminent role it had enjoyed prior to Jacob Zuma.
Right. Now, we saw that there were divisions within the ruling party during this election. Is Cyril Ramaphosa, looking ahead, going to get the party behind him to carry out his program of action?
I think it's going to depend entirely on how the new National Executive Committee pans out. He needs to look who amongst those 80 people that have been elected are on his side. Does he have a comfortable majority? And the degree of comfort in that majority will determine the degree of decisiveness with which he will implement both the unity mandate that he has received, but certainly also the renewal mandate and the reform mandate and the cleaning up mandate that he has received. If he has a comfortable enough majority, I suspect that people in South Africa want him to recall Jacob Zuma, remove him from power, get a power himself, and start the process of cleaning out corruption, getting the economy going, building confidence amongst our people that government cares for them again, is intent on creating jobs, renewing the economy, and taking the uncertainty out of the social services, whether it's pensions or health, that I think the country has been experiencing. So I think that Cyril Ramaphosa has a difficult task, but not an impossible one, because I think that South Africa has all the ingredients to do well. It has not always had the political will to do well. Its leadership has been distracted and self-serving. I think Cyril Ramaphosa is able to change that at least.
Well, let's talk about getting the economy going. The Bloomberg News Agency has published something of what Cyril Ramaphosa would like to accomplish. One of this is to get economic growth up to between 2% and 3% in the short term and up to 5% within 5 years. Is that realistic? Can South Africa achieve that?
Look, I think it's going to be difficult because we need to examine the degree of institutional collapse and compromise that had happened in the Zuma years. We have the state economic enterprises. We've had that used as a kind of milking cow by those who were captured and were corrupt. We have had an attempt to compromise the fiscus. We've had the revenue services compromised, and so there is a huge degree of institutional rebuilding that would need to happen. So it's not easy, but already just on the expectation that Cyril Ramaphosa could win, the last quarter's economic growth has moved to 2%. That's only one quarter that's worth of growth. But I do believe that the ingredients are there if he has the team that is able to give him the support in order to take on what has been the untouchables within the Zuma administration.
Ambassador, the ANC, of course, played a huge role in ending apartheid in South Africa. But now in South Africa, you have a new generation in the country growing up in this post-apartheid South Africa. And they're concerned about things like jobs, education, about housing. How much of a challenge is that for the ANC and for Cyril Ramaphosa?
Look, that is probably the major challenge that Cyril Ramaphosa would face. I think that he has to head off, and to some extent, the past conference of the ANC has moderated a lot of the economic positions into not orthodox economics, but radical enough and orthodox enough, somewhere in between that, in order that we can focus both on growing the economy as well as how do we distribute the proceeds of the economy. And we need to understand that the most sustainable distribution of the proceeds of the economy would be through job creation that's sustainable, through an economy that is growing, and business that is contributing. I think that there are going to be challenges for Cyril Ramaphosa because we can't endure any longer the slow pace of land reform. And so certainly we've got to change, for example, the formula from a market value, which is inflated in South Africa, to fair value. We need to give people who own the land currently fair value, but not necessarily market value. I think we've got to make the second transition in which, for example, it is not necessarily how much ownership, empowerment, or black economic empowerment must have, but the methodology that is predictable, that is stable, and that is sustainable, that I think is going to be absolutely crucial. So those are the challenges that Cyril Ramaphosa has to countenance. It can't be business as usual, but it can't also be the kind of out-and-out populism, and he needs to persuade young people to retain faith in the ability of South Africa to look after their future.
Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, thanks for joining us, sir. And that's all we have time for on this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CGTN America, or visit us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.